Feet back there and the other one.
Just go get him a jacket.
I'm slowly introduce myself now.
The audience is online.
Okay. That's fine.
Oh yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. So, and then Nisha, and then you, and then Hussein. Okay, great. Yeah. I don't think we've met. It's nice to meet you too. Yeah, we talked from a while back.
That's cool.
One of the organizers.
Still very relevant.
Oh yeah, I think it is. I think it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, very helpful.
Me too. I'm really excited. When I saw the other panelists, I was like, this is going to be great.
I'm slightly scared because I saw that and I'm like,
Oh yeah.
can I say what this is? Okay, I'll do my best. I'll just do it.
It does need to be said. All of this needs to be said. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's such a big space. It just actually makes me feel right at home.
I know.
It's
I feel the same way. It is. It's very comfortable and warm and yeah.
the Union Center.
Yes.
The Union Center downtown does not feel
No, it wouldn't.
at all.
No. Doesn't hit the same. When did you move to
It's like, actually, yeah, in 15 days it'll be 20 years.
Okay. Really? Wow. Okay.
I just moved here in August. So
I've been here about four going on 5 years. So still got a while to go before I get to your level.
Oh, I wish I was as active when as soon as I came here. So yeah, it's a dream. It's still a dream.
That's always, yeah, I felt really lucky because that was always how I was involved in organizing in the U.S. when I moved, and that was how I found, that's how you find good people. Come here and do some of the same things, and you meet really awesome folks. We do stuff like this.
You were also recently here as a student, right? So like a few years?
When did you come to Manitoba? Yeah!
I came in January, left in April. I did not do any relationships, so technically I came in September. And I raised all of this hell.
For like the first time
No,
doesn't count.
I think this head was already here.
yeah.
Probably I doubled it, or I did like a catalyst role in it.
Yeah,
That's all I know.
that's brilliant. Understood.
I'm working on a project, the Story of Liberation. It's a play.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
We need
I'm an
more.
actor and I'm the spokesman about it.
We need more pro-Palestinian art.
We're gonna probably do it in May or April because we want a lot of people to.
Who are you doing it with?
She used to be a film student in the University of Manitoba, similar.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wants to work on video stuff. Her name is Jennifer Muhammad. She lives actually near UNM, and she texted me tonight. She's a film teacher. She had an interview with her sister, and it's called Snow Angel. And she would like to do something on Palestine. She wants to
She wants to do a movie
she wants to
or
do
a
short
feature.
videos, but
Sketch.
she wants to do videos. So she
Sketch,
needed-
I understand. We did a sketch last 3 days ago. We started working on the project, like doing an introduction and everything. We filmed a sketch, and then we filmed an introduction. So we speak in English and I speak in Arabic. But we had an issue with the editing software. It was glitching. So we're gonna.
That stuff always does that. It's so
Yeah,
frustrating.
she's gonna finish like the editing and like the sketch is already there. Well, I even drank a bottle of colored water that you shouldn't drink just to show that I'm a good actor. They did not ask me to do any of that.
Your method. Your method.
Exactly. Because I did like a short movie before that
Yeah.
was far away from home.
Oh, okay.
I smell meat for some reason.
Oh no, it's sage. Yeah, there's sage.
Oh.
There's sage.
But I need a cigarette. Cigarette is the magic. You know, we're Arabs, we need the...
I don't generalize, but I understand.
No, all Arabs smoke. This is not generalization. This is facts.
I know.
You're making me miss it. You're making me miss it.
That's what my dad used to say.
Hi, everybody. Hello. It's 7:05, so I think we'll aim to get started in about 10 minutes. Okay.
Israeli colonization before the cancer or whatever. So he was very
Yeah, my grandpa had the same thing. He had blood
He's
cancer.
not wrong. That's
He
an
wanted to take a smoke in the bathroom. He fell. He had an internal bleeding. Just for a goddamn cigarette. This is how much he loves cigarettes.
Beyond.
That's
miss
life.
it.
okay. You're speaking to the audience.
To
that's
parents.
Yeah,
Speaking to
to
parents.
parents, but also to the audience out there that's watching on the live stream.
Oh yeah. Hi live stream.
That's beautiful.
I know. It's actually makes me think a lot. Yeah.
They had him at when they were having the event, the Palestine solidarity event a couple weeks ago. They had a table summit event.
Yeah. Yeah, I was out of town unfortunately.
Yafa still has. I don't know if they still have something.
Oh wait. Oh.
I went there once and they were out, but then I think I might just like went there like
Okay, no, I didn't know the
busy time. Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
I've seen you at many rallies, so I don't know if we've actually like
And heard
officially
you.
like
Oh
been
no.
introduced. But yeah.
San Shukr.
Good to meet you. I'm Nisha.
Nice to meet you. Where is Ramzi? Where is Sifam?
Ramsey is on a national Zoom call
So
with
cool.
organizations tonight. He was like, he said,
Like-
I thought it was live in the meeting. I said, Ramsey,
You couldn't have told me I was on a call.
this sounds like an important meeting you're going to.
No, really impressive.
Yeah. It is.
Damn it.
Kids are all
It just makes me think of like how like messed up just the tragedy of having to like learn how to so fast.
I have no idea. I have no idea where that is.
Same with Cambria.
Yeah.
So I thought the exact same things with her when I.
Is the internet not working?
Oh, I don't know.
Misha? Is the internet not working?
I'm not sure. I know that Mika is trying to connect like for the live stream.
Oh, I see.
And I think was hoping to find like the physical like Ethernet cable to plug in.
Check. Okay.
But I don't know.
That
Left
works.
that in her hands to figure out.
It's a little scrangly, I think. Check. Check, check.
That's great.
So excited.
Really good.
Check.
Personally. Yeah, I'm like, start talking, continue it.
Start talking.
Personally, this panels and all that's good. Like I like facilitating, I like hosting, I can
Yes.
rallies, all that kind of stuff. But it's like
I
such
like
a
discussion-based stuff more.
yeah.
But
When I heard it was like 10 minutes each, I was like,
I can talk for 10 minutes.
but I'm like, well, coherent.
But like officially, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I have to break it out, because otherwise I'll just like scream constantly too.
I have some scripts even written in here, if I'm being honest.
Sometimes I
toilet's
will
over
too,
there.
but like sometimes, yeah.
I gotta remind myself to add that in.
Gotta, yeah, we need it for emphasis. And like, just for
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My friend once said, and it was a joke, but I think about it like my swears are sacred, and I like laughed at that so hard. And I was like, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's real.
It was in response to an elder trying to shame them for like using the word guy in front of them, and I was like, oh my god, that's hilarious.
Are the mics live now with the?
I don't think so.
Oh yeah, they are.
Oh.
Is the conversation online right now? Is that
They're probably just laughing.
I don't think it's picking up too much of what's going
That'd be
on.
hilarious though.
We don't care.
I didn't say anything secret.
oh yeah.
You're just like, watch out.
I said that with my whole
Open heart.
chest.
No, I just want you to know.
Yeah.
At least this room looks very friendly. I don't know what's behind the online room.
All those 63 people come at me.
Square up.
Winnipeg. So funny. Phenomenal.
We're having a good time.
I really hope that some of my friends are listening from other territories right now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Let's start when Hussein is back, I think.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Sounds good.
I don't think we've ever like gotten to do anything like this together though, which is kind of nice.
No, never.
I've
Just
been
like,
to a lot of your stuff, but it's nice to be able to like be on the same,
do things.
doing the same thing.
Exactly. And it's fun.
It is
Like,
fun.
like I know it's like such a messed up thing to say, especially like during like such a tragic time.
Oh, I know what you mean.
But
though.
like, but sometimes you just gotta thrive and enjoy it so you can continue your ability to organize.
And doing exactly. Like doing things like this for me, it's like helps keep my revolutionary optimism.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. I also, I love being nosy at these things. Like I love knowing who's who, like where
I
people
do
are.
too. I want to see who everybody,
Yeah.
who all's here.
I want to ask a couple questions like raise your hand if you're from here.
Yeah,
and
you
just kidding,
should.
no. That's self-serving. Otherwise,
I love that though. I love that.
But I broke I broke the frames on my glasses like a while back, and I've been meaning to replace them. So I'm fine, I can see properly. But like past the first row, people's faces start getting blurry, and I'm like,
same.
I can't snoop now. I can't be nosy.
That can help with anxiety.
It can. You're
Sometimes
right.
I'm thankful for it. I haven't gotten a new prescription yet because sometimes I don't want to see.
You don't want
I've
to
seen enough. I'll be good.
I've seen this world enough times.
I've seen enough. I'm about to turn 35. I'm good.
Problem today sounds that it's not a problem of seeing, I guess. People are seeing.
Everyone's feeling good. Does it feel like the right time to start? I guess
so.
there's like a couple people still coming.
It's totally up to you.
Yeah.
But
Fine
just
whenever.
exactly the answer. I was
Let's
like,
wait.
sorry you asked it.
Yeah,
I know
thank
you just
you.
want someone
Let's
to
wait
like.
till 7:30.
7:30?
I do not know, but I think maybe more people will come. No, let's wait till 7:30.
And then immediately walk you back.
7:45.
Do you want me still to start it off with jokes? Let's entertain the masses.
We see that there are still a few people streaming in, so we're going to wait a few more minutes. Just as a reminder, there are accessible washrooms right there, gender-neutral washrooms. In the basement, there are more washrooms. There are masks available at the front door. We really encourage everyone who can wear a mask to wear a mask tonight. We're collecting donations to cover the cost of the venue and equipment rental, so if you feel generous and able, please throw a couple dollars into the vessel at the front door. And of course, there are t-shirts for sale over there with proceeds going to Gaza relief efforts, as well as to Queers for Palestine organizing. So we'll wait a couple more minutes because we see some more people streaming in. Thanks for your patience.
I'm like gripping the microphone the way a squirrel eats a nut.
No problem. You're just probably not used to it. That's why.
But you showed up early this time. You beat me.
Relax.
That's true because I had a ride.
Go grab a cigarette or something. You will come.
That's the only time. A little bit of time. That's what we need.
Exactly. But I cannot really curse because there's a lot of.
This is why it's good to have a ride. Either you all show up late together or you all
I'll show up one time.
Either way.
That's smart.
They'll like WhatsApp your dad right away.
Here's a clip
No, he doesn't give a fuck. He knows that I swear like a sailor, but he won't be happy. They do not know that I have
just
a
up
dad.
to me. I'll be like, oh, I've got time, and then it'll be like 5 minutes before like I need
Yeah,
to get
children.
there.
Like, no, you don't. You know, I have the worst. Like,
Thank God I'm a horrible child. Otherwise, you won't see me at rallies.
just lack of time awareness.
Yeah. It's challenging.
I've gotten a little better since getting medicated for ADHD, but still.
My area is so iconically busy.
I love it so much. I don't like the sterile like panel tables. I like when there's like stuff out, you know?
Start sticking stuff on my pockets.
Yeah, just
I think that's perfect.
I'm gonna start doing that. I'm gonna start bringing like my Peric
Just listen here.
Just put 'em out.
They're in school.
Oh.
Yeah, and they'll hopefully come for the very end, but it's their last class and they have to
There
do a
is actually like
presentation.
enough like
Yeah,
room here.
yeah,
I feel like I wish I had taken your move and like rock my
You're
mom.
leaving to Hong Kong?
You know, this was a risk.
Yeah, Friday.
This was I thought about it. I
I
was like,
wish you have a
I don't
safe
even know if
life.
standing and talking. Like that would suck. I would fully do this.
Yeah, I would. I'm warm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Plus,
fuck
I'm
you.
like,
Like,
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I think
but Winnipeg is
We have the worst one of the three.
I think stand.
Not really when
Which
it
is
comes
like-
to cold.
That stand is a mistake. I'm so sorry.
I know.
where do you
The
think
moment I
you'll
saw
want
it, I was like,
where would you settle down?
Who, me?
We can also
Hell,
Just pull it.
I do not know.
down here.
we can take it off.
we can also
Like,
move
I
this
don't
one
know.
down.
That's true. If you
Yeah,
wanna
like
use
if you
ours,
want to use
Whatever,
this.
whatever
I-
gives
I-
me
I
the
think
most money,
this is fine.
that's where I'm
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
As long as you can take
But
this
I know
out,
my
fine.
final destination is gonna be Lebanon. I just want to go back to the old country. I wasn't born there, nor raised there, but just the vibes of it. Whenever I go there for vacations, is something else. On the big mountain
that makes me
with my kids and my wife beside me. That's the golden dream.
I always love seeing babies events like this. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I know. My butt's gonna get stuck here. I think we're starting. I think we make
Because
sense.
it's all
to
in my
start.
last pass.
Should yell, come up to the front. Stop being shy. Holy fuck.
Come on down.
For real. And like, if people arrive late, they're not gonna come to the front.
No.
Very busy guy. I wish we would have come. I really wish.
We're actually a lot more chill than I thought it would be.
Good. I feel like everyone's feeling pretty good about it. Excited.
Just gotta wrap that up.
Like, best case. Either way, it's like
Yeah.
things go good, so things go good. If they get too far design it. Either way,
Exactly. Like in
I'm not mad at those options.
6 with that.
Yeah, you're good.
I've seen people really
Of like a bunch of people who I've also like organized with and
Yeah.
everything too, and
Yeah.
being like, yeah, this is like a step about like speaking at a meeting, but
Yes.
like it's not that out there.
No, it's like people you know. And
Getting a thumbs up from Ronald.
Yeah, I think.
That's like a get started thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Looks like it's.
How does the moderator speak? Okay.
I know. It's like I'm gonna start crashing.
Real,
My ADHD meds are gonna wear off.
Okay, hi everybody. We're gonna get started. There will be a chance after the panel to buy t-shirts and prints and patches as well. So just before we get started, I'll again make some housekeeping announcements. There are gender neutral accessible washrooms just in the back here. And there are more washrooms downstairs if those ones are full. There are masks provided at the door, and we do encourage everyone to wear a mask tonight if you can. The event is being live streamed over YouTube. Hello, people on the internet, and there are auto-generated captions available. The event will also be recorded and available after tonight, so share it around. And we are collecting donations at the door to cover costs for the event, so costs of the venue and the equipment rental. And finally, we expect the panel will be over by 9 or 9:30, depending on how long our illustrious panelists speak today. So I'll ask people to grab a seat and we can get started. Buying t-shirts and other merch is very important. I understand and respect that choice.
We can just start with that. Yeah, we'll be fine. We can start too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. We talk loud.
Okay, so I should introduce myself. My name is Isabel, and I'm a member of Queers for Palestine. I'm going to be moderating tonight. I want to start by acknowledging that this panel is taking place on Treaty 1 territory, the lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dene, Dakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. These territories are currently under colonial occupation by the city of Winnipeg and the state of Canada, which was founded on the genocide of Indigenous peoples, a genocide which is ongoing because the peoples of these lands never gave up, never surrendered. They're still here, still fighting for their sovereignty and their lands. Many of us have seen signs and banners over the past weeks that say, "Don't let Palestine become another territory acknowledgement." We've all heard land acknowledgements from the forked tongues of settler colonial politicians and institutions who only perform these acknowledgements in order to place colonial dispossession firmly in the past. So today, as we acknowledge that this panel is taking place on Treaty 1 territory, we hope for this acknowledgement to bolster in a small way the ongoing struggle of Indigenous peoples against the colonial occupation of these lands. The struggle does not begin or end with land acknowledgements, but forges ahead toward total liberation and decolonization. As we've been chanting in the streets every single weekend here in Winnipeg since Israel's genocide began, Canada for the past 9 years, focusing on decolonization and solidarity work. Ron aims to use his organizing experience, the resources he has access to in the nonprofit sector, and his political and organizing networks across so-called Canada to support the liberation of oppressed peoples everywhere. Ronald will be discussing the stakes of the Free Palestine movement for Indigenous people of Turtle Island and the possibilities of building an international Indigenous-led movement for decolonization. Esther Wolf. Esther Wolf is a non-binary Romani Jew of Appalachian descent, now residing in Winnipeg after immigrating to so-called Canada. Esther is a harm reduction worker and a member of the anti-Zionist Jewish Committee of Queers for Palestine Winnipeg. Esther will speak about the need for Jewish solidarity against imperialism and Zionism. Misha Stone is a poet and gay communist living on Treaty 1 territory. She's a member of Queers for Palestine Winnipeg and an associate editor of Midnight Sun magazine. And Misha will be discussing militant trans and queer solidarity and direct action. Liz Carlisle is an award-winning community activist and works for a large public sector labor union. She's engaged in Palestine solidarity work. She has been engaged in Palestine solidarity work for 3 decades and is a founding member of the Winnipeg Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid and Labor for Palestine Winnipeg, as well as a member of the Canada Palestine Support Network Winnipeg. And Liz will be speaking on class struggle, what power do workers have, and why should they use their power to fight for Palestinian freedom. And then finally, Hussein Choker is an 18-year-old Lebanese man from the area of Baalbek. His father left a war-torn Lebanon in 1993, and his mother left a war-torn Iraq in 2003. They settled in Kuwait, where Hussein was born. His goal is to raise a generation that values all human lives, differentiates between right and wrong, and uses their brain to think for themselves. Hussein will be discussing the youth and student movement for Palestine. So I'm going to invite Fadi to share his remarks first. I think so, yes.
Hi, can everyone hear me? It's so nice to see everybody here. Everything I've been doing is watching news, and I can't even throw my recycling outside the door. So to see you all here in a full room, especially when the university is silent, when all the spaces are silent, and for fear of speaking out, it's really humbling, and I think it's something that, why should we really have a friendly Manitoba plate? For this reason, not for the other reasons. But yeah, so thank you all. And I want to acknowledge and thank the organizers for hosting this, to think about how to free Palestine in action. Okay. Oh, I thought the Zionist got the mic. I'm just. But yeah, I didn't start yet, so let me speak, and then you can listen, and then we can talk if you wanted to talk, if that was the discussion. But sometimes we need to give the land back before we talk. So yeah, I was invited to think about organizing and transforming a ceasefire into liberation from here, Turtle Island, to Palestine. But it's important because what's on the table right now is an eliminationist policy. They're not even asking for a ceasefire, which is a minimum. So thinking about liberation beyond the ceasefire is about making a world where Palestinian lives are not eliminated. Context, briefly. I have 10 minutes, I know. Standing on stolen land, it's important to acknowledge that Manitoba has a long history of Métis Intifada against the Canadian state. Since before the founding of Manitoba in the 1870, and then in the 1885, the Métis resistance, an intifada, the Canadian government inflicted a reign of terror to terrorize the population, push them off the land, and establish a sovereignty, which we got the Canadian government. So today, while many Indigenous communities are living in crisis, policing, poverty, etc., settlers are in developed spaces on stolen lands. So whether you force a colonizing government to recognize you or not with a ceasefire, elimination is ongoing, regardless of October 7. If you asked us how we'd feel, the feelings are still there. Now there's some validation because people can see what we sometimes feel all the time. On Palestinian liberation, intifada, Palestinians have been fighting for sovereignty and self-determination even before 1948, when the State of Israel was created, and it forced many Palestinians off their lands, including my father and my grandparents. So in the 1960s, Palestinian resistance was often oriented around the Marxist orientation. The demands were about against any form of imperialism, Zionism, or Arab bourgeoisie domination. The goal was a democratic state for all, regardless of your background. So often it was peaceful in forms of civil disobedience and mass protest, as with the first Intifada in 1987. Just a bit for Canadian history, or the terminology, Intifada means an uprising against an Israeli occupation. The first Intifada in 1987 broke out after the Israeli military killed 4 in Jabalia camp in Gaza. Jabalia camp is important to keep in mind today. The Intifada camp, the Intifada in that year, in those years in the 80s, influenced the Mohawks warriors in Quebec fighting during the Oka crisis when they wanted to build on their land a golf course, a burial ground. So communities' resistances are across borders. Sometimes it's disruptive, sometimes it takes different forms. There's different strategies. So today, in the same Jabalia camp, in Jabalia city, in the Jabalia camp in Gaza, bodies of families were found dead because they were executed by the Israeli military. So colonialism is a process that's ongoing, and every time you have violence from the state, you have a counter-resistance. So liberation of Palestine, Indigenous Intifada, Free Palestine is about right of return, the freedom to stay, to move. Those, you don't need an academic degree to understand those things. You just need a relationship with the land, relationship with your kins, your natal, your family. So it's for self-determination against Israeli occupation. Since 2006, Israel has launched 5 wars on Gaza. Gaza, not to mention that the daily settler violence in the West Bank and Israel, not to mention the struggles of Palestinians in camps since 1948, some of them, not to mention people in the diaspora. So I just want to highlight 4 main points for my discussion in terms of what I think should be important. So moving forward, I think supporting the BDS campaign. Since 2005, many grassroots communities throughout Palestine have been demanding the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Those demands include things like withdrawing support and investment from Israel's apartheid regime, supporting campaigns to pressure the government to fulfill its legal obligations. So putting economic and cultural pressure, you can end Canadian complicity. Sure, we got a ceasefire today or yesterday. Are we going to keep getting a ceasefire? Is this government happy with just the ceasefire? What's next after? Is the ceasefire a way of recognizing the other to suppress them? Or is the ceasefire starting to acknowledge that, yes, I see you and I hear you and we're going to keep fighting for this? And I don't think that's what the government have in mind with the ceasefire. But yeah, I know some of us are celebrating this moment, but yeah. So the first one is the BDS. The second point beyond that is in terms of Zionism. So we need to think about a strategy of just how people say decolonization. We need to think about de-Zionization. Recognizing that Zionism invites anti-Jewishness and anti-Palestinianness. Criticizing Israel for dispossessing and killing Palestinians is not anti-Semitic. We need to reclaim the land through nationhood, not statehood. Thinking about world making beyond borders, beyond visas and passports and ethnic backgrounds. So this involves things like challenging the Nakba denialism. Your family experience didn't happen, or if it happened, it's necessary for a Zionist state. And Christian Zionists really struggle with this, especially when I share my experiences because my family is both Christian and Palestinian. Since we're in a church, you need to know that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. I had 10 minutes, but I can keep going on Jesus in the Q&A if someone had a question and about my vision of Palestinian Christianness and liberation and my fear about going into the church. But my third point is about tackling anti-Palestinian racism. Halfway, okay, great. Including harassing and targeting Palestinians, whether they're in daycare, they're schools, they're in universities, workplaces. So many have pointed out the heightened anti-Palestinian racism that we have around us. It's really difficult for a student to speak on campus. Never mind being young and coming in with a visa and worrying about your family, being able to travel. So yeah, I know Hussein didn't speak yet, so I see a lot of bravery. 20 years ago when I came and I was 18 years old, it would be hard to grab a mic and speak. So I recognize that and I appreciate it. But I also, yeah, having spent here 20 years, fortunately and unfortunately, things really didn't change that much in some ways. We have a lot of Zionism in Winnipeg in many circles, but again, there's a Q&A for that. For now, in terms of the anti-Palestinian racism, what should we do? It's a zero-tolerance policy about racism in our spaces, in our church, at home. Do not sweep it under the rug. Try to be proactive instead of just reacting to what we hear. Having spaces for Palestinians to grieve, to mourn, to be angry, because those spaces don't really exist a lot. We talk about community, but what community and where is this community often? And it's often fragmented when we have it, and it's momentary. And so now we have attention, but where is this attention after the war ends? And the war doesn't end in that way. You might stop the fire, but the heat is still there. You feel it in the heart, you feel it in the economy, you feel it in your parents' life. So they tell you, don't listen to the media, listen to the parents' tears. You can see the suffering. But on that note, offering a space for that counter-narrative, counter-memory. You see the media today is so problematic in its coverage, and it's very limiting. In organizing and mobilizing liberation here in Turtle Island, it's important also to be abolitionist in our thinking, anti-colonialist in our orientation. There's a pressure right now when there's white supremacy around us to work with police, but we shouldn't be working with the police. On this... So it sounds like we have a whole bunch of Christian abolitionists in the room, given the claps that I got so far. So that's fine. But we should also open reality for a lot of differences. And I'm preaching to the converted. It's just there's a whole big elephants outside this room, unfortunately. The police is the one who repress communities, and so pro-Palestinian liberation won't happen without indigenous liberation permanently here. And so this means we need to question our relations with the police, and we need to also talk about class politics, the bourgeoisie that benefit from this, whether it's here or there. And I'll end with this, and I look forward for the discussion. Thank you. Yeah.
Anim Bojo, Makre Mixing the Indigenous Cause, Makwaming and Lodondam, Winnipeg Treaty 1 Nadonjaba, Anishinaabe, Métis, Inanuandao. My name's Ron Gamblin. I am an organizer in the city. I have been organizing in the city for about 9 years. I'm also a young person. I'm a drummer. I'm a bundle carrier. I'm also just someone that loves this community so much and tries to show up for this community in the different ways I can. I'm usually not one of the main speakers in my organizing circles. This is always a fun way to stretch out my legs whenever it happens, so I might stumble, I might mumble here and there, but that's okay. But I thought regardless it was important that someone from my community was here to speak up, to talk about what's been going on from our side. We often, as Indigenous people to these lands, we hold so many commonalities with our Palestinian kin right now, as you heard so much by the first speaker. So I thought it was imperative that I showed up here regardless of how uncomfortable I might feel or how uneasy I might feel. First off, I would just like to say miigwech for everyone showing up here today, for the organizers for bringing together such an amazing panel. It's a humbling honor to be able to sit here with all of you. I've seen you all really show up for your communities and for one another over the past couple months. I've seen you speak out against violence in your communities. I've seen you have to adjust whenever you actually physically see the violence happen here, that Zionism happen here. I've seen you share love, I've seen you share joy, and I've seen you share in sorrow. So I just want to say miigwech for all you've been doing. So I've spent the past 9 years of my life being a pretty active member of my community here. From planning local initiatives to revitalize our traditions, to organizing community initiatives, to raise our collective power as an Indigenous community here, to taking on my own ceremonies, to pass them on, to negotiation with colonial bodies, to make sure that we're reducing the harms we're facing, and to shut shit down a lot of times for one another. I've seen my community be so beautiful. I've seen my community do so much for one another. I've seen my community do so much for other communities too. That's why it's actually been a bit disappointing, I'm going to be honest. So while I know there's a lot of Indigenous kin that have been showing up to rallies, that have been present, have been sharing on social media, I actually don't really see our gifts coming out, us offering ourselves in the ways that we can. I also especially don't see our leadership showing up in the ways that they should. We only recently got an announcement from AFN, which drastically too late. I'm happy when everything's happened, but that took way too long. So I'm here today to step back from the language of like, I want to be in solidarity, but to recognize that we haven't been showing up, actually. Our movements are tied, our liberation is tied, but we have not been doing our part, and I want to recognize that. I actually wrote a poem. So I'm also a writer. I call my little silly poems, but they're actually usually pretty, they're reflective of the different organizing that's going on within the community. And I wrote this poem out of like my frustration and anger of what I've been witnessing. So the poem is From Turtle Island to Palestine. A call to my Nietzsches who cry every child matters. Where are you now while Palestinian baby die? Why do we sit in silence? Our pipes remain unlit. Our drums remain lifeless. Our halls remain idle. Our dances remain motionless as this violence runs rampant. Relatives in our streets begging for their people's survival, demanding for all to cease, pushing for their land's revival. It is deafening, having our teachings abandoned while colonial powers are reveling, leaving the Palestinian people stranded. We must break from this prison, our confinement of complicity, this fear of complexity. We must stand and listen. Wrap yourselves in jingles, drop your tobacco, sing for liberation, shout for the end of occupation. Their movement is ours when we chant, every child matters. This includes Palestinians' babies. We must make this colonial machine shatter. Free, free Palestine. Thank you. Yeah, and as I mentioned, I wrote this poem kind of as a response to the lack of any showing from our leadership during these times. I remember seeing at the start of all this, not only Palestinian voices being ignored, but actually being shut down by Indigenous leadership in this territory, specifically Wab Canoe, I'm going to be honest. Shame. While I'm happy, some things are now being spoken out about. It was so disheartening to see so many of our leaders every year ask for so many different communities to show up and say every child matters, to fight for our liberation, to fight for the end of the genocide here. But when other people's babies are dying, not doing the same. And so I wrote that poem out of that anger and frustration. So today here, so like I said, I was feeling disappointed, and I had the desire to see my community do more. So today I sit here and I say I'm sorry. I'm sorry we have not lifted our pipes here yet. I'm sorry we have not been offering all of our gifts yet. I'm sorry it took so long for our leadership to speak up. I'm sorry it took someone like Wab Canoe, who has been an influential figure in our community for years, has ignored your pleas for so long. This is not the best my community can do, and I know we can do better. Like I mentioned, I was invited here to speak a little bit about the complex relationships that we both have towards settler colonialism within our movements and the solidarity we have between our communities, but I wanted to step a little further back. So today, I'm going to sit here and actually say a few words primarily directed towards my Indigenous kin. So my Nietzsches, where are you now? What is causing this hesitation to utilize your gifts? I know it's not of a lack of skill, we are born with it. I know it's not of lack of empathy, we walk with an abundance of that. I know it's not of a lack of care for Palestine and their babies, because I see you at these actions, but I just don't see you with our gifts. I'm asking you to move from a place of idleness and hesitation. It is past our time to act, but we need to move now. Even though we are facing our own systems of oppression, we in these lands in Winnipeg, especially in Winnipeg, hold an influence like no other. We hold strategic resources and political power with many colonial institutions. We have made Canada come to a halt many fucking times through direct actions, and we have eyes on us from both our allies and our opposition. I know we are resilient. I know we are resistant people. I know we are rowdy people, and we need to utilize these gifts now. So I'm going to ask you, meet with your local Palestinian organizers. Offer your songs at these rallies, bring out your pipes in ceremony, use your voice in political spaces, bring your dances to the forefront, use your beats to raise funds, and offer your medicines to our kin. We must act now for a kin that deserve this love. Palestine deserves so much. So while I say these words, I also want to commend, there has been Indigenous folks across Turtle Island doing work. It's just my own frustration, specifically with Winnipeg and some other communities. I want to commend some of the folks who have got me, myself, moving from a place of idleness to a place of motion. So to name my good friend Veronica Fuentes in Edmonton, who's been organizing different art builds and direct actions and getting their community consistently showing up for Palestine. I want to shout out those dancers in Toronto who have been showing up week after week in their jingles and their regalia. It is a beautiful sight, and I haven't seen any other communities, so I just thank you so much. I want to shout out Quill Christy Peters, who was quick to react to the violence immediately and organize an artistic fundraiser across Turtle Island for our Palestinian relatives. I want to shout out the Yellowhead Institute. The Yellowhead Institute has been very, very, very amazing at releasing piece after piece about what's going on in Palestine, how it's related to us as Indigenous folks here, to make sure our communities are not holding up Zionist values within ourselves. And then, even though it did take a while, and even though I do hold some pieces of my heart around this, I do want to commend our leadership, such as Chief Nepanak, Dr. Willie Littlechild, and Chief Fight Duck, for actually taking the stand and then putting the motion for a ceasefire within the AFN recently. I know it took a while, and I know it took a while, and I know it's frustrating to have to take that long, but I'm proud of you, and I'm happy you're making our ancestors proud too. These are just some of the ways our people have been able to show up, and great examples on what we as Indigenous folks in these territories can do for our Palestinian kin during this time. Beyond the call to action, beyond all these negative feelings around shame, I also want to ask, how can we ensure we have long-lasting, sincere solidarity with our Palestinian kin? As you were mentioning earlier, I find that a lot of times whenever a lot of these solidarity movements happen and they come about, we allow ourselves to be reactionary and in that moment. We allow ourselves to immediately address the need, but the moment the immediate, very visible need is gone, we allow those solidarity movements, we allow those relationships to let go. So this is called to my Indigenous relatives, and calling to my relatives here, my Arab relatives too, on how we can be in better solidarity with one another. I want to ask, what would it look like for us to move from reacting out of guilt, for us to act out of our own teachings? What would it look like for us to react from reacting out of common cause to acting because that's what our ancestors want us to do? What would it look like for us to move from reacting to immediate need to a place where we are ready and to stand by to support when called upon? I think it's critical that we think about these things, that we ensure that we're holding the idea of longevity of our relationship in mind, and we don't allow this to just to be a spectacle every time something happens. Palestine deserves so much more, and our relationships deserve so much more. I know we as Indigenous folks can get caught up in our own fight for liberation. We have been facing colonialism for hundreds of years. We have been facing this violence for hundreds of years. But even so, while it might seem overwhelming, and might even seem like a burden to some to try and take on another struggles, it is not. I know it's for a fact not. I've seen our people again and again show up for other kin, whether this be during Oka, whether this be for Standing Rock, whether this be for Wet'suwet'en and other Indigenous nations. So why should this be any different? I don't think it should. We should be able to shut shit down. We should be able to show up for our relatives. And we should stop with this narrative that this is not ours. So while we as Indigenous nations should see the commonalities in their struggles, I think what we need to do is ensure that we're working from a place of sincerity in our hearts, that we're ensuring that our relationships are key, that we're ensuring that we aren't doing this out of performance, but we're actually showing up for our Palestinian kin. So I know I've said a lot of words. I know there actually aren't that many Indigenous folks in this room right now. I know my community, and I'm looking around. But even with that said, I want to name a couple different things in which we can do. So first off, we can organize our own dialogue sessions. I think it's important that we can come to these spaces and we can show up to these solidarity spaces, but we actually need to have these internal conversations first to remove Zionism within our communities. I think we need to continue to organize low effort things such as art builds, to continue general momentum within our communities, to introduce people who have never had these kind of conversations before. I think we need to start having more in-depth conversations with our Palestinians kin here about what actions we might be able to do and about what shit we can shut down, honestly. And then we can also, we've done it a couple times, we've done it many times. Continue to write, continue to do fundraisers, continue to push for continue to push your nations to put out words for ceasefire, to put out for words for liberation. I think we're just not doing enough right now, and we need to do more. So I know my time is up, but at the end of the panel, if possible, I would like to offer a drum song. Thank you.
How y'all doing? Good? Good. Good. First of all, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me as a speaker. It's really an honor to be here speaking with these other panelists, all of whom are people who I personally admire and whose work really speaks for itself. So thank you so much. My name is Esther Wolf, and if you couldn't tell from my name, I am Jewish. And I'm a Romani Jew, a mixed-race Jew with family originally from the Appalachian Territory in Virginia, and which has a long history of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, socialist, communist, labor organizing and resistance that goes all the way back to Maroonage. And I just want to say, before I get started tonight with my speech, that I didn't find out I was Jewish and that my family was Jewish until later in life. I was not raised Jewish. I didn't go to Hebrew school. I did not go to synagogue. I was disconnected, and I didn't find out until later that my grandfather was Jewish and that he had hid it his whole life to escape anti-Semitism, that he had even changed the spelling of our last name from Wolf without an E to Wolf with an E in order to try to hide that history. So I just want to say, if you are a disconnected Jewish person, if you are someone who wasn't raised Jewish, if you are a mixed-race Jew, if you are a light-skinned Jewish person, you belong in this movement, you belong in this struggle. You are Jewish enough to criticize Zionism, to criticize Israel. You are Jewish enough, you belong in the struggle, so get in it if you haven't already. All right. So tonight I want to read something from an article I've been writing about the inherent anti-Semitism of Israel and of Zionism, which is something that I think really needs to be talked about more and is important to the strategy of our movement. Within the Palestinian liberation movement, and particularly amongst Jewish organizers working in solidarity, it has become a common rhetorical strategy to emphasize that support for Palestinian liberation and criticism of Israel's colonial imperialist occupation is not anti-Semitic. As a result, a great deal of critical analysis has been done to belabor the distinctions between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It is understandable that as Jewish organizers, many of us have utilized this strategy to position ourselves within the movement and build Jewish solidarity and support for Palestinian liberation. It is now important for us to reflect on and innovate this strategy in our current context. As we organize on stolen land in the imperialist center, it is more important than ever that we understand Israel's occupation of Palestine as a racist colonial project in service of Western capitalist imperialism. In this context, it is not enough for us to only distinguish anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism, or to continue to point out that criticisms of Israel's occupation of Palestine are not inherently anti-Semitic, because this stops short of the important historical reality that Israel's colonial imperialism is itself anti-Semitic, that Zionism is an inherently anti-Semitic ideology. I want to argue that recognizing Israel's anti-Semitism and Zionism as an anti-Semitic ideology is vital to Jewish analysis of the Palestine liberation movement, to shaping the rhetoric of the movement to reflect its current conditions, and to building Jewish solidarity within the struggle. When bringing up an analysis of Israel and Zionism as anti-Semitic, I'm often asked the following: how can Israel be anti-Semitic if it is a Jewish state populated by Jewish people? How can Zionism be anti-Semitic if it is a Jewish ideology? But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of both Israel and Zionism. What determines whether the nation of Israel and Zionism are or are not anti-Semitic cannot be reduced to simply how many or how few Jews live there or espouse its ideology. It really has nothing to do with this at all. Rather, the anti-Semitic roots of Zionism and the Israeli colonial imperialist state are the result of its class interests. Another response I often get when talking about Israel and Zionism's anti-Semitism is this cannot be possible because Israel was created as a direct response to World War II and to the Shoah, an answer to the question of Jewish national liberation struggle. To respond to these questions and to illuminate the anti-Semitic roots and class character of Israel and of Zionism, it is necessary to briefly revisit this history. Zionism and the argument for a Jewish state was, of course, established long before World War II or the Shoah. Of course, so was anti-Semitism and the forced expulsion of Jews throughout Europe. But early Zionist arguments and negotiations directly tied to what eventually would become the first iterations of imperialist control of Palestine and eventually Zionist Israel quickly reveal the class interests and alignment of the Zionist movement. In 1914, Chaim Weizmann, who later became the first president of Israel, argued that the creation of a Jewish state was in the interests of English and European capital. In 1916, during negotiations that would eventually lead to the Balfour Declaration in 1917, Zionists argued that in exchange for European support for an eventual Zionist state, they would support British control of Palestine in the intermittent period. This was an extremely appealing proposal to the British Empire, which, as it was negotiating with the Zionist movement, was simultaneously hoping to curb the Arab Revolt, a pan-Arab resistance movement that hoped to unify what would eventually become the sovereign nations of the Arab region. In 1919, during negotiations for what would become the British Mandate of Palestine, British policymakers spoke and wrote openly about their desire for European Jewish capital to fund the creation of a European state that would bring Western civilization to the Arab world. I think we all know what that means. T.E. Lawrence, who was a critical agent in the 1915 negotiations, wrote in one proposal to the British government that, quote, "Indeed, I look to the Jew as natural importers of Western leaven so necessary for countries of the Near East." Sounds familiar. Revisiting early Zionist negotiations for what would eventually become the Israeli state quickly reveals the class interests of the Zionist movement and of Israel. For Zionists and their imperialist allies, the ultimate goal of a Jewish state in the occupied territories of Palestine was not to provide an answer to the Jewish national question, but to establish a stronghold of settler colonial and imperialist capital against what was becoming a potentially unified bloc of majority Arab nations. The class interests of Zionism only became more clear after the establishment of the Israeli state in occupied Palestine. During the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel captured the territory of Golan Heights from Syria and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. In the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel again invaded Egypt and seized one bank of the Suez Canal. In the 1982 Lebanon War, Israel invaded and occupied the region of southern Lebanon. By examining this history, it becomes clear that the goal of creating a Zionist state was not Jewish national liberation, but to destabilize sovereign Arab lands and to bring these territories in line with the interests of European imperialist capital and its expansion. The colonial imperialist class interests of Zionist Israel have resulted in its alignment with fascist and blatantly anti-Semitic governments and its open condemnation of liberation movements. In the 1970s and 1980s, Israel armed and aided the military junta in Argentina, which massacred Jews and harbored Nazi war criminals. Israel also armed and aided the Garcia Meza dictatorship in Bolivia, whose regime included Nazi fugitive Klaus Barbie. Between 1967 and 1987, Israel also publicly supported and aided the South African apartheid regime and condemned the anti-apartheid movement. Israel also exhibits the anti-Semitism of its class interests through its treatment of racialized Jewish peoples. The Mizrahim, Israel's invented terminology for Jewish peoples of Arab descent, continue to be subjected to forced deportations, visa denials, economic oppression, and other forms of racist abuse while living in the Israeli state. You don't have to dig far to find myriad examples of the racist anti-Semitism of Zionists towards Arab Jews in Israel. In 2003, while acting as finance minister in Ariel Sharon's government, Netanyahu himself espoused that, quote, we have a demographic problem, but it lies not with the Palestinian Arabs, but with the Israeli Arabs. From 1948 to 1954, Israel enacted what would become known as the Yemenite Children Affair, or the Kidnapped Baby Affair. During mass immigration to Israel, it is estimated that hundreds, if not thousands, of infants were stolen from Yemeni families living in migrant camps in Israel. Hundreds of Yemeni families gave testimony saying that after being forced to hand over their infant children to Israeli nurses in the camps for a health examination, they would return to claim their child, sometimes only hours later, only to be told that the baby had died. They were not allowed to see a body. It has long been believed and argued that the stolen Yemeni babies and other infants of Mizrahi descent were given to Ashkenazi families in Israel. This anti-Semitic racism can also be clearly seen in Israel's treatment of its Afro-Jewish population. Until 2013, thousands of Ethiopian Jewish women were coerced into being given birth control by Israel's health ministry without their informed consent. The women were told that the birth control injections were routine flu vaccinations. The form of birth control administered was Depo-Provera, which has also been used in the racist sterilization abuse of Black women by the United States government. Like Arab Jews, African Jews in Israel are also subjected to systemic visa denials, mass deportations, and other forms of anti-Semitic racist abuse. But why is the historical anti-Semitism of Israel's colonial imperialist class interests important to strategizing the movement for Palestinian liberation and the role of Jewish organizers in the movement struggle? One reason is that Zionism and the creation of Israel also serve to fracture the potential of an organized Jewish resistance movement and its shared material interests with other working class, indigenous, racialized groups, and struggles for liberation. While anti-Zionist, anti-colonial, and anti-imperialist Jews have always existed in the organizing struggle, the decades before the creation of Israel marked a period in which Jewish socialist and communist organizing was heavily involved in anti-imperialist labor movements in the Western Imperial Center. While this lives on in the Palestine liberation movement, the establishment of Zionist Israel siphoned off an enormous amount of internal support for Jewish liberation and absorbed it in service of the very same Western imperialist national interests that originally enacted the anti-Semitic expulsion of Jewish diasporic peoples from Western Europe. These historical realities have important implications for building the mass Palestinian liberation movement in Canada and throughout the imperialist core, and for the role of Jewish organizers in the movement. Examining the class interests of Israel and of Zionism makes it clear that any analysis of Israel's colonial imperialist occupation of Palestine is incomplete without recognizing its historical anti-Semitism. By the same token, our analysis of anti-Semitism today cannot be removed from our understanding of Zionism and Israel's ongoing colonial imperialist class interests. As Jews organizing for Palestinian liberation, foregrounding the anti-Semitism of Zionist Israel as a strategy ultimately allows us to connect and build solidarity with Jewish people outside of the movement. I'm not saying that's going to be easy, but it does. By making clear the material reality that Jewish people as an oppressed class and historical Jewish resistance struggle has always aligned in its interest with Palestinian liberation and with other working class, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movements more than it ever has with Zionism or the Israeli state. As Jewish organizers in the movement, we can't be afraid to identify the inherent anti-Semitism of Zionism and Israel. We should not be afraid to say that colonialism is anti-Semitic, that imperialism is anti-Semitic, that white supremacist genocide is anti-Semitic, that not only does Zionism and Israel not reflect the interests of all Jewish people, but that they have and continue to do great harm to Jewish people and to our shared stakes in Palestinian liberation struggle, in all liberation struggle. As analysis, it's historically and materially correct, and as strategy, it builds new pathways for solidarity with Palestine and for our collective liberation. Thank you very much.
so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out here tonight. I'm really honored to be on this panel. And I'm going to be talking about Queers for Palestine and some of the actions that we've taken over the past 2 months. And while the writing, the words are mine here, I really want to emphasize that my analysis here really comes from the kind of collective experience and learning that I've done with all of my comrades in Queers for Palestine over the past 2 months. So thank you to all of you who've been involved in that struggle. So, members of Queers for Palestine have carried out a series of escalating direct actions since we formed in mid-October. We occupied Liberal MP Dan Vandel's constituency office, organized a shame parade targeting banks that fund genocide, picketed a Boeing plant, confronted Federal Health Minister Mark Holland, disrupted an award ceremony honoring Magellan, and blockaded CN Rail for nearly 5 hours. With CPAM pouring energy into the weekly All Out for Palestine rallies and groups like Peace Alliance Winnipeg and Students for Justice in Palestine doing incredible organizing, doing rallies and vigils, we saw direct action as a way that our group could up the ante and contribute to the movement. There are different definitions for direct action that distinguish it from protest and different approaches to this, this set of tactics. Some direct action groups have the specific goal of getting arrested. And this is meant to show that the dedication of activists and raise the profile of an issue. So groups like Extinction Rebellion are really known for crafting highly publicized direct actions kind of as moral condemnations of politicians and civil society. The idea is to create pressure on bourgeois individuals to change their views by directly confronting them and with symbolizations of their complicity in ecological devastation. And there's other very different approaches. One critique of this approach views it as overly individualistic and and instead emphasizes the centrality of economic disruption as the way to really threaten capitalist society. In a critique of the Free Palestine movement in Canada, an article on the anarchist news site North Shore Counterinfo described the marches, nonviolent direct action, speaking out, and popular education being carried out by the movement as a form of mass theater. In their words, this theater produces only a transient effect compared to actions of a more concrete kind. The authors of this article challenge movement organizers, saying that whatever you do above ground, maybe it's time to take it under. For this critic, symbolic action is hollow and the only way forward is to pursue sabotage and more high-stakes disruption. So these are two different forms of approaches to direct action, and I'll talk a bit more about how Queers for Palestine has been approaching the question. We have seen symbolic action as deeply intertwined with material action, not as opposed to it. This is immediately evident actually when you look at the way that the Free Palestine movement has faced repression. When students are suspended for posting on social media, or in the States when 3 young men are shot simply for wearing keffiyehs, symbolic action suddenly comes with very material risk. In this way, the risks involved with direct action are also not exceptional. Anyone speaking out for Palestine is faced with risk in this moment. The Italian communist Antonio Gramsci writes that when ideologies acquire the fanatical granite solidity of popular beliefs, they have the equivalence of material forces. And this is true every time someone chooses to remain silent out of fear. The symbolic force of has a real silencing effect. And at the same time, it is also true that for how the movement for Palestine has made widespread expressions of solidarity possible like never before. The goal of being arrested in direct actions guarantees an outcome in confronting the cops. In this way, it forecloses the possibility of achieving an analysis that goes beyond the particularity of an encounter, which might give insight into the balance of forces between our movement and the state. On the other hand, the underground saboteur approach sees economic disruption as a guarantee of an action's efficacy. In this way, economic disruption is the only metric of success, leaving questions about mass political consciousness necessary to carry out such actions unanswered. Those of us carrying out direct actions with Queers for Palestine see experimentation as a key factor for direct action. In this sense, we embrace the description of direct action as a form of theater. It works best when the outcome isn't guaranteed, when elements of risk and experimentation are present. This way, we test our ideas against reality and allow ourselves to draw concrete lessons from our experiences. So anyone who's been around the activist left in Winnipeg knows that there are kind of a set of standard forms that protests can often take here. We're really good at holding rallies. We're good at gathering at the steps of the legislature. We're good at taking Porridge in Maine. Yet every political action also has its ingrained limits, and this is not to dismiss them, but this is true of any kind of action we take. We must learn to identify when our actions become a ritual for maintaining existing organizational structures rather than achieving new political goals. In preparation for the CN action, we tried our best to research the kind of laws that we might be subjected to before we occupied the rails. Yet there is no way to know how the police or CN itself would react once we jumped the fence and stopped the flow of commerce. When officers threaten us with arrest and we call their bluff, saying, "Fine, arrest me," we draw back some of the mystique and fear that police power relies on. If the cops want to follow through on their threats, they will have to show their hand and take risks themselves. At our action at Boeing, we had a modest plan for a soft picket. We were going to hand out flyers to workers entering and exiting only one of the entrances of the facility. When we rallied together before heading out to the picket, our group took a vote on whether we wanted to continue with the idea of a soft picket or whether we wanted to up the ante and do a hard picket, physically blocking cars from entering the facility. An overwhelming majority of those who showed up to the action voted in favor of a hard picket. Furthermore, we decided to block all 3 entrances to the factory, not just the one. This showed us that there was hunger and excitement for more militant actions. It also provided an avenue for people to express their desire for stronger confrontation. It would have been right to critique us as adventurists had we pressed forward with increasingly escalating tactics without any information about how the wider movement or the state would react. By building through successive experiments and shaping our militancy and tactics in response to the energy of the movement, we have tried to help foment a more confrontational energy while remaining in relationship with other elements of the movement. The ideal is for this relationship to be reciprocal. At arm's length from CPAM and other Palestinian leadership, we have the ability to take extra legal action, which they can't necessarily. We can then feed this energy back into action, the energy of our actions back into the weekly rallies. We see this direct action as only possible as one part of a broader movement ecosystem. It isn't something that we carry out as anonymous militants, but as a publicly organized intervention that allows for the expression of a confrontational energy that is often kind of more contained at protests and rallies. By trying new tactics and allowing ourselves to experiment, we've continuously seen members jump at the chance to learn new skills. Moreover, direct action helps build a political consciousness among people in the movement. In a short period of time, many members who've never organized before have started speaking confidently in meetings and taking on leadership roles as if they had years of experience. This kind of skill building can become lost when an organization settles into familiar patterns of action. Those who know how to participate do what they do best, while new people struggle to find chances to try out things and feel like they're contributing. We need organizational forms that can help bring up new generations of dedicated anti-imperialist fighters. While Canada has just voted yes in the UN call for a ceasefire, the Palestinian youth movement has put forward 4 demands to go beyond a ceasefire. These demands are a lift on the siege of Gaza, release of all Palestinian prisoners, end the 75-year occupation and colonization of Palestine, and an end to Western complicity in Zionism. The movement as it exists now, we can clap for the Palestinian youth movement. So the movement as it exists now, though, it is not adequate to the demands of the Palestinian youth movement or to the organizational effort it will take to free Palestine. We do not have the existing organizational structures or bases of experience to draw from to have the movement that we need right now. Queers for Palestine and other groups have tried to exploit this current moment the best we can to learn quickly and build capacity and experience for struggles ahead. We cannot wait until we have enough forces amassed, or until enough popular education has been done. We need to act now. Right now, we're in a critical moment as a group, metabolizing our experiences over the past 2 months, and in order to chart the way forward. To do this, we need political education and strategic analysis. This political education should include but not be limited to the study of history and revolutionary theory. Our goal is not to have the best index of phrases by Lenin or the most nuanced interpretation of past revolutions. Political education is building the capacity to analyze our own experiences as they're happening. It is the ability to clarify both our lines of unity and difference between ourselves within an organization and between our organization and others. The barricades and picket lines of direct action are the ideal classroom for this study. We're living in the belly of the beast. We know the local Magellan facility has just been awarded a 10-year contract this summer to build critical tailpieces for F-35 fighter jets, which Israel purchases. We know that CN Rail carries containers for the Israeli-owned Zim Corporation. We know that the wealth this country is built off of comes from its genocide of Indigenous peoples here and its sustained campaign of imperialism, colonization, and dispossession abroad. We are living through a world historic moment, which is also a living nightmare. In the midst of our grief and terror, we have an opportunity. Palestinians in Gaza and around the world have shown us a way to another possible future, one where genocide is not tolerated and occupation is not normalized. They have shown us that this is possible. It is possible to struggle against the violence that structures the social and economic context of our everyday lives. They have shown us that it is possible to win. In the words of the Palestinian youth movement, the people of Gaza offer a revolutionary North Star. Let it guide us from the world as it is to the world that we want it to be.
Hi, good evening. Thanks so much. Thanks and shukran and miigwech to Queers for Palestine for organizing this event, and to the Ukrainian Labor Temple for welcoming us into this space. It's important that we recognize that even with increased mainstream awareness of the ongoing genocide and the occupation of Palestine, it is risky for organizations to provide space for Palestine solidarity. It is no accident that it is a labor hall like this in which we are gathering, a hall steeped in labor organizing and revolutionary ideas. Speaking today as a member of Labor for Palestine, I'm conscious of the fact that in spite of the limitations of today's labor movement, unions are in fact independent from government, autonomously funded, and able to speak up, act up, and move issues forward. I can see lots of opportunities and potential to build Palestine solidarity within labor and among workers. I want to talk today not just about opportunities, but strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's a classic framing, and I hope it will be helpful. I want to get into what we really want to talk about today, and that we've been building towards. How do we build on the current surge of solidarity for Palestine, online and in real life, to build stronger movements? So I was raised in a primarily secular, humanist, Christian tradition. I grew up here in Winnipeg. My parents are middle-class academics. They met at grad school. And growing up, me and my 5 siblings learned to question things and to question a lot. My mother is very patient. I grew up with some eccentricity and independence compared to some of my peers. But I also grew up with basic middle-class white sensibilities and experiences. I had some experiences in school of feeling like an outsider. And I know that that feeling of being an outsider might have been part of what brought me to this path of doing Palestine solidarity work and other kinds of anti-oppression work. Because even now, even with the millions of voices that are speaking up loudly, voicing support for Palestine does make you an outsider in our context here, in Winnipeg, in Canada, in North America, and in our systems of white supremacy. All of us who are doing this work have had to make the choice to support Palestine, and that choice exposes us. That context is changing, and I want us to think about how we can make that change happen at the institutional level. That choice is clearly harder for some than others. We've heard about solidarity with Indigenous movements here, land back movements, and movements that are struggling and fighting to end and change settler colonialism. It's no accident with Palestine solidarity work that many of those who have been fired, suspended, shamed publicly, or lost their status in the groups that they operate in because of criticizing Israel or criticizing Zionism. It's no accident that many of those folks are racialized, are Indigenous, are people that cannot mobilize the privileges of whiteness. It's also no accident that Israel, the Israeli Tourism Board and the government seek out Indigenous groups, Filipino groups in Winnipeg to go and visit Israel to see the project of settler colonialism through Israel's eyes. It's no accident that that propaganda is specifically, that they specifically seek out groups that they know will help create an image of being a human rights oasis for Israel. And so, unfortunately, that IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is doing exactly what we feared it would. It is being used not just to silence, but to punish legitimate concerns about Israel's actions, about genocide and apartheid. And so the good news is we're not being silent, and we're not alone. And our project is essentially, and I want to really boil it down to ways that we can help folks who haven't yet chosen to do this work, how we can appeal to folks, how we can make it mainstream that we have a different narrative. We want to change the narrative, not just for us, not just for those folks in this room who've made the choice, but to make the choice more accessible for others. I know that's tough because it comes along with a lot of questions about whether people will be in it for the right reasons, whether they'll really be committed to Palestinian liberation. I think those are always things we need to work through, and I think that the labor movement, for example, is no different than any other area of society. Our institutions are not just Zionist, not just pro-Israel, they're anti-Palestinian. My partner is Palestinian, and he has numerous times spoken at events and simply stated, "I am Palestinian." And many times folks have jumped up in the audience and said, "No, you're not. Palestinians don't exist. Are you an Arab Israeli, or are you an Arab who lives in the occupied territories?" They wouldn't say the word Palestinian or Palestine. And so that's a small measure of progress to where we are today, where the word Palestinian is being said. I can't tell you how happy it makes me to hear the word Palestine and Palestinian over and over and over again. It's a sign that we are shifting things. So I want to say a few more words about how I came to this work, because I think it's useful for movement building to understand some of the things that have happened in the past. So I worked in the mean 90s and the early 2000s in the student movement. I was elected as Secretary-Treasurer of the International Union of Students in March 2000 in Tripoli in Libya. Those of you who followed the history of the student movement would know that during the Cold War, the International Union of Students was part of the Soviet bloc. By the time I got involved in Cuba in 1997, the IUS was in crisis. It had been nearly a decade after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain. The IUS needed a new approach and started to build on a strong base of mostly independent national unions of students. And there was a choice made to try to build in Western Europe in particular and parts of Asia. In student union circles, it was only in Europe, Canada, and the US that Palestine solidarity was really controversial. It was a dividing line between progressives with an anti-imperial, anti-colonial, anti-oppression approach, and those who saw student unions as pseudo-governments or stepping stones to power. This may not seem important to our local work, but I think it is. I want folks to really think about what that means. Palestine solidarity has not been controversial for many, many decades, except in the seat of empire. So that is the biggest threat to our work, that we are working against forms of power that see us as the threat, that see liberation as the threat. I learned about Palestine solidarity from student leaders in every part of the world, and most importantly, from Palestinians. I learned that there were mass movements of people, regular people in every part of the world that stood for Palestinian liberation. I also learned from Israeli institutions. I recall a meeting in Geneva of European students, the National Union of Israeli Students, and they attended and requested to join the IUS. It was very telling that they felt they should be eligible to vote in both the European region and the Middle East region. Looking back, I can kind of laugh at that, and I think we touched on that trying to mobilize these different forms of power. And it was very disheartening to speak with them about the rights of Israel, because as a student organization, they spoke about not the rights of students or the struggles of students in Israel, but of the rights that their government asserted. When I asked these student leaders what rights they recognized for Palestinians, they said, they have none, we do not recognize any. I asked again, surely Palestinians have rights, the same human rights we all have. There was a long pause, and they simply stated they have the right to come to the table to negotiate. So I was in Israel and Palestine in 2002 in the midst of the Second Intifada. I visited Israel and the occupied territories, East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza. I don't have time today to talk about all the things I saw. It's the things we've been talking about, back in 2002. Those same things were happening, all of the forms of oppression, all of the violence, and all of the restrictions, and things like you can't grow onions because onions help counteract tear gas, therefore the growing of onions is policed. Businesses can only have 10 staff people, all kinds of, every single aspect of day-to-day life for Palestinians is policed and regulated, and they try to crush any kind of joy that anybody derives from just daily activities, not to mention the control of water and all the resources, counting the number of calories that go into Gaza. They've been doing that for a decade and a half, restricting calories to what's reasonable to be able to survive, but not what's reasonable to be able to thrive and grow. And so when I traveled to Tel Aviv on that visit to Israel and Palestine in 2002, I traveled from South Africa, and wow, do the Israeli border authorities let you feel their power. I had heard from cadres in the student movement that I should expect delays in searches when I left from South Africa. That extra attention is because Black South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, is a longtime ally of the Palestinian people. Every time I traveled to South Africa, there was a mass rally or march for Palestine. Every time, not just in big cities, in smaller towns as well. That's because of what was mentioned earlier, that the apartheid regime of South Africa shared know-how, tech, weapons, and intel with the Israeli apartheid regime, and also really arm-twisted and pushed the South African regime to buy weapons that would create a kind of link in apartheid between Israel and South Africa. And so that comparison people use, that analogy of apartheid, is real, and it is long-standing, and it's important that we keep saying it. And so I think that if I go back to Winnipeg during this time, I can mention that we had a number of organizations dedicated to Palestine solidarity. We worked sometimes out of the Emma Goldman Grassroots Center, for those of you who remember the site at 91 Albert. There was the Canada-Palestine Support Network, and we organized similar kinds of activities in a similar way to what we've been doing for the past 2 months. Rallies, interrupting corporate business, marking Palestinian Land Day on March 30th, the Nakba on May 15th, holding panels, teach-ins, sit-ins, info fairs, debates, conferences, lectures, book talks, workshops, film festivals, potlucks. We had Palestinian rappers, a group called DAM, come in to do a rap show, and we did Israeli Apartheid Awareness Weeks. We showed Gazan children's art. We presented in high schools, invited guests and experts from all over the world, from Palestine, from Canada, from the US and Israel. We fundraised for the boat to Gaza. We met with Rana and the groups trying to organize the Canadian Museum for Human Rights to recognize the Nakba and make it part of the Human Rights Museum's work. We lobbied to end diplomatic relations with Israel, to have cultural boycotts, academic boycotts, and we showed up to oppose legislation, and legislation has been passed several times in Manitoba to criminalize or silence Palestinian resistance. And so now we have CPAM, the Canadian Palestinian Association of Manitoba. We have Independent Jewish Voices Winnipeg, Queers for Palestine Winnipeg. We have Filipinos for Palestine, who I saw in the room earlier. And so when CanPalNet and WKAIA, the Winnipeg Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid, that was formed to undertake the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions work in Winnipeg, when they became more dormant about 8 years ago, I have to admit that we struggled to be able to keep the work going. It is a problem that we have. One of the weaknesses we have is that we have a lack of resources, and we have a lack of ability to sustain and grow the work that we're doing. And so I wanted to talk, just as I wrap up here, about some principles for Palestine solidarity work. I hope we can learn from what happened in the past and build on the work that's been going on in the last 2 months. I think that to help make our work more mainstream and grow the number of folks who are not only supporting the work but doing the work, it will be, and this goes for the labor movement. I know I was to speak about the labor movement, but I think that the labor movement is no different from other movements. There's no magic answers in the labor movement as to how to do this work, but there are certainly lessons. And I think that most importantly, we recognize that Palestinians have the answers, that our theory of change has at its most basic principle that those experiencing oppression have the answers to their own liberation. So it's up to us to learn what we can, and there are so many sources. You'll be able to find out everything you need to know, but it's important for us to trust the Palestinian community to help guide us. And our main job is to amplify Palestinian voices. Palestinian survival and resistance is the starting point. The long-term goal is supporting justice and peace, and that comes along with amplifying Palestinian voices, even when it's not easy, even when it's out of fashion, and even when it puts us at risk. We have to support each other and get comfortable with discomfort. As I said, all of our institutions here in Manitoba are essentially pro-Israel and Zionist. That's the baseline we're working with. And we also want to reject division and reject sectarian division in particular. And then, of course, we can't give up. We have to ensure that we're maintaining ourselves and our movements in order to challenge the institutions that we're up against. And I'll just say one more thing back to our strengths. Of course, we've had a big breakthrough in the last 2 months in the volume of support and the frequency of how it's been expressed. So we're winning the culture and communications battle for hearts and minds. But again, institutions are bending, but will spring back, and we need to keep the pressure on. Sami Hamdi is a political analyst. That's Sami Hamdi. You can search him on YouTube. He's great. He has a lot to say, and he talks a lot faster than I do. But if you play it back at 3/4 speed, I guarantee you'll catch all of it. He's really brilliant, and he's been teaching me anyway a lot about the Ummah, the worldwide community of Muslims, and how Muslims are speaking up for Palestine. He also credits youth and students and all of us who are using the algorithms of big tech social media to amplify Palestinian voices. And so his message is that we are winning the online struggle, that Israel is losing the propaganda wars badly, and that we're doing it for free. The real world consequences are that governments are buckling, swerving, and changing their stance due to the pressure. What we need to do now is to take a step to build at least 2 additional layers into deeper organizing to recruit and build a support base and make new connections and mobilize support to act to change institutions where we live, work, and play. And that means it's not, again, I said I don't have a magic answer, but part of the answer is that we have to be okay with coming out of our otherness and going into the places to have the conversations with the family members that we don't think are very much on side, with the coworkers, with all the people in our networks, that we can start changing their hearts and minds. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Hello. Use this mic. Okay, hello everybody. I just have one question. How many of you here are ages 14 till 21? Just raise your hand, please. 14 till 21. Okay. Okay, not that much. Okay, we can raise hell. Anyways, so today I want to speak about the roles of the youth, their struggles, and what can they do to help this movement. So I would say, starting up with the roles of the youth, they have been relentless with the social media war. We cannot ask you guys to do anything crazy. I know you guys are a little bit cuckoo in the mind. I understand that. I'm a youth myself. But one thing that we should really focus on when you guys do your activities is always shy away from violence. Let violence be your last resort. We cannot let anyone take an idea of us that we're barbarians or just violent people, because this is a very bad stereotype that has been given to us Arabs and supporters of Palestine in general. I mean, I've faced these things. They call me the preacher of hate by this point. So you should be very, very clear about it. And it would always go back to the parents. I would ask parents, encourage your kids to stand up for what's right, but at the same time, enlighten them. Ignorance is the biggest enemy of mankind. Not greed, not hate, not the devil. It's ignorance. We should have the difference between a Zionist and a Jew. This is a very big misconception that everyone is facing at the moment. No one is able to differentiate. And I would encourage all of the parents to do that, because we cannot afford to have issues within our inner circle. Esther and the rest of my panelists have been amazing. They just said most of the things that I want to say, to be honest, about strategies, so they saved me a lot of time. Anyways, I want to go back. The difficulties that they face, unfortunately, due to institutions, just what we saw with Arij Al-Khafaji. It's been, I'm a student at UFM, by the way. There has been a lot of tension between pro-genocide students and pro-Palestinian students. It has been crazy. And actually, a couple of days ago, an article by Dr. Ben Badr, who is a Jewish doctor in the University of Manitoba, briefly explained the dangers of the things that we are facing at the university, the tensions that are at an all-time high. I'm sure many of you are aware of Raghad Al-Karaki. She just made a video very popular about a week ago. It went very viral. She expressed how unsafe the campus has been for students, especially pro-Palestinian students and Muslim students in general. And for me personally, I've kind of faced them. I mean, every Zionist by this point knows who I am. But we should be very smart with the actions that we take. We should be very considerate of the things that we say. I know I was gonna swear. They're annoying. They're very annoying to deal with. I would rather shoot myself in the head than speaking to a Zionist, and I'm not even joking with that point. Just like Dr. Yusuf Sufi said before, in our retaliations, we should have a very high moral standard. We should be smart with it. And there has been a lot of student organizations recently. They're trying to do activities, but they do not know how to reach out with. I will tell you. You want to raise hell? Go to Queers for Palestine. That's simple. That's simple. You want something more organizational? You have CPAM. You have the rallies. Just like Misha said before me, during these rallies, you will develop your skills. I mean, how did I develop my skills in speaking? From the very first rally, I started speaking. Ever since, my mouth has been running like a radio. So what I would encourage the youth and students to do is speak up. Stand up for what's right. What are you scared of? Detention? Suspension? Your parents being mad at you? Why are you scared? There's nothing to be scared of. So what? They suspend you from one school, you could go to another one. Hey, it's not the end of the world, trust me. You should be courageous and brave and at the same time smart. Being brave and courageous while being stupid doesn't really help, to be honest. So I think I just finished everything that I wanted to say, to be honest. My panelist colleagues are amazing. They covered almost everything, so there isn't a lot that I should speak about. And I would just give one last advice to the youth. Stay close to your parents. You never know when it's gonna be the last time you're gonna see them. Listen to them, go to them whenever you're having these issues. They can really help you. Trust me, the only thing that a parent wants for their child is the best for them. I know you're young, you're crazy, you want to do something that you believe is right in your mind, and it may be, but 90% of the time it will never work, and this is coming from a youth right here. I've done a lot of crazy things in my life. This is where I'm bringing things from. So go to your parents, speak to them. You need some organizational help with your hell raising? You have Queers for Palestine, you have strike posters, you have CPAM. There's a lot of things that you could do. Just do your research and then act upon it. Do not go in guns blazing. Please, this is my final and only request. Be smart and do not go guns blazing. I do not want to waste any more time. Whoever wants, we're going to start our questioning session. And thank you very much for attending.
Wow. I think I can speak for all of us here. Listening to that, I'm really in awe of the breadth and the depth of the analysis that our panelists offered. Thank you, Fadi, Ronald, Esther, Misha, Liz, Hussein. So in a moment, we're going to open it up for Q&A, and then we'll close with a song from Ronald. So the way this will work is we'll have a round of questions from the floor. So we'll take 3 or 4 questions maybe, give panelists a chance to respond. Then we'll have a round of questions from YouTube. We'll take a few questions, give panelists a chance to respond, and that might bring us to time. But as people are, I'll say, you're very welcome to ask questions to any of our panelists or to the panel as a whole. You are not welcome to ask questions that question the basic assumption of this panel, which is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So while people are formulating their questions, I'll get us started with one that occurred to me while I was listening to our panelists. So on one hand, we are united behind the banner, All Out for Palestine, calling on all people of conscience to show solidarity with the Palestinian freedom struggle. On the other hand, the question of Palestinian liberation draws dividing lines. The question of Palestinian liberation draws dividing lines based on class and colonial interests, as we've heard from some of our panelists today. Dividing colonized peoples from colonizers, dividing the working class from the bourgeoisie. So I want to ask panelists, to what extent do you think we need to build a broad united front against Zionism, or organize our communities independent of bourgeois and state forces, or is there a third option? I don't know. So I'll open it up if there's somebody who wants to speak first.
Yeah, in terms of options, I think it's always a struggle with thinking about what to do. And so if you're following like the works of indigenous scholars like Glenn Coulthard, who was talking about the idle no more and talking about liberal politics of recognition, how we moved in Canada from not recognizing indigenous people to recognizing them, but the recognition came with a way of like lying, that we recognize you only to steal more land. And that's how we had Idle No More burst up. And so now it might have, you know, that strong wind in 2012 of Idle No More and the inspiration, you see it erupting sometimes, but it's not necessarily there as in 2012 moment. But he ends his book by saying that, so what do I do? What do we do as a movement for indigenous struggle? So yeah, you can fight within political process, fight within institutions, fight within school boards, fight within whatever you are. But if that's all your battle, then it's a losing. I don't have that much hope in institutions on their own to change, especially when we're talking about indigenous land. So yeah, you could fight within the political process. You could also fight with alternatives. And you can fight for the third option is maybe in the institution and also outside those institutions. That's all I'll say for now.
Too short. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I wanted to speak briefly about to the question about shared, or to the question of class interests. How do we organize along lines of different class interests within the movement, within groups of racialized people, colonized people, et cetera? Because they're not homogenous. These are not homogenous class positions that racialized and colonized people occupy within and outside the movement. I think it's really important to emphasize shared class interests and shared stakes in the struggle. I find that often, you know, when we think about the history of the creation of white supremacy and even the creation of whiteness as a category, we can see the ways that this was done very intentionally by design in service of capitalism, in service of imperialism, in service of colonialism, to divide movements of struggle along lines that are actually shared. So for example, like when I'm thinking about Jewish organizers in the movement or outside of the movement, I often get asked a lot about like white Jews, you know, Ashkenazi Jews or Jews that are considered white, or Jewish people who occupy maybe a wealthier strata of class than others, than racialized Jewish people. How are we supposed to build coalition with them? And one of the things I usually mention is that so-called white European Jews were not always considered white. They weren't always included in the category and constructions of whiteness. And that was done, they were brought into whiteness very deliberately and very intentionally, and it functioned sort of similarly to the creation of Israel, which is that it siphoned off and fractured a more unified, organized resistance movement of Jewish people who were very aware that they shared more class interests as Ashkenazi Jews, as Mizrahi Jews, as racialized Jews, as Afro or Indigenous Jews, shared more interests with each other in terms of their oppression by capitalism and imperialism and colonialism. They shared more interests in the struggle together and with each other. So the fact that that has been fractured has been done very intentionally. I'm not saying that that different class positions don't exist in the struggle or within groups of racialized or colonized people. They absolutely do. But I think emphasizing our shared class interests and the ways in which we share those positions of oppression from capitalism, from imperialism, from racism historically, from colonialism, more so than we will ever benefit from sometimes being included into the construction of whiteness and things like that. So, yeah. And if you're a white Jew, be a class traitor to whiteness. Betray whiteness. You have more in common with other racialized Jews than you ever will with anti-Semitism and Israel and Zionism. Anyway.
Yeah, I have some thoughts responding to your question. So, in thinking about like why Queers for Palestine, why we chose to organize around that specifically, like the solidarity with Palestine is a huge, and imperialism generally is a huge dividing line between queer communities that separates kind of the radicals from the non-radicals, and part of why we chose this framing was to intentionally like kind of create this sense of a wedge of that there were queer social networks and political networks that we could draw in people very quickly to mobilize for. And there were also elements of the community that we were going to be organizing consciously kind of in opposition to. There are queer parts of the queer community that are very invested in pinkwashing and supportive of Zionism, and that those are that is part of the community that we are in opposition to and consider not actually something to organize against, rather than try and bring in, well, I mean, ideally we could bring them into the fold, but the way we do that is through struggling against that. So what has been striking to me, especially, is to see how those fault lines kind of break down on multiple different levels. So we have the queers who will stand with Palestine and the queers who are invested in pinkwashing. And within the folks who have been involved in Queers for Palestine, it's often those who are already most like excluded from queer community in many other aspects, in many other ways, who find kind of common cause around doing work for Palestine, even though we have other kind of shared bits of our identity that are kind of present and we kind of note on, but we actually come together around this specific cause. It's really kind of notable to me that like a number of the direct actions I've been involved with in the group have been like 50% trans women doing direct actions together. That's felt very personally powerful. And this is like, so when we think about what groups to organize with and who to form alliances with, what I often think of is like, who are the people in our communities who are most marginalized and who are most forcibly disorganized in their own life, their own capacity to fight back. And in this case, like coming together to fight for Palestine is something that has brought together community and brought together an ability to politically organize and build solidarity with one another in a very broad way that I found important.
Thank you so much. Just looking at the time, I want to make sure we get some questions from the audience, both here in the Labor Temple and also online. So if you have a question, please make your way up to the microphone there. And I'll make sure that the panelists who didn't have a chance to answer the first question get first dibs on later questions. So I see a line forming. Okay. Okay, so that looks like 4, which is good. I bet that's what we have time for. And I think, Brendan, do we have some online questions as well? We have 1. Amazing. Okay, so go ahead, please, David.
Thanks. Testing? Yeah. Is this working? Yeah. So my name's David. I'm a member of the Thicket Socialist Collective. And I've got a couple comments, and I'd like to hear what any or all of the panelists have to say about these thoughts on how we can build the movement in Winnipeg. And I just want to start off in the spirit of, I think, Ronald's and the kind of self-critical spirit about looking at our weaknesses in order to talk about how we can get stronger. Because I think there's a big gap between the amount of support for Palestine there is in the city and the numbers of people we've got acting in the movement right now. And I don't think those numbers have been growing the way that they need to. And it's wonderful that we have Queers for Palestine, Labor for Palestine, which I belong to, Independent Jewish Voices, CPAM, Students for Justice in Palestine at U of M, and a few other groups. But there are lots of people who don't fit into one of those groups. And we really need other organizations, new organizations to, I think, tap the new wave of support that's out there. And I think we also need some kind of coordination committee or coalition to link up the various groups that are willing to work together at least some of the time. And I just want to throw out an idea then about an action or an approach. I think we need lots of different tactics. I don't have all the answers for sure. But I do think one thing we could do that would help would be to make a commitment to some kind of really serious mass action, much bigger than what we've seen so far in the city, one that would really draw out thousands of people. And this is not just a matter of going on social media and putting out a call to reach the people who've been responding that way. It would mean having to do some really serious outreach into communities and workplaces, motivating people to participate, explaining why their actions, their participation makes a difference, and also encouraging them to get involved in an ongoing way in organizing after the big day. And I think that could help rekindle some of the momentum and generate energy that would flow into new initiatives in the city. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that thought. Thanks.
What was the question?
I really would love to hear feedback from any or all of the panelists about that approach, about trying to concentrate on a mass action, to not just do mobilizing for it, but really organizing in communities and workplaces that would then help us kindle momentum for new initiatives.
I think that one of our...
Sorry, Ronald. We'll just let all of the question askers ask their questions, and then panelists can respond to the kind of the assortment and maybe choose the ones that they feel most called to respond to, just for the sake of efficiency. And yeah, I will ask question askers to try to keep it brief if you can and focus on a question. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. My name is Inga. So I really appreciated the panelists. I know several of you emphasized the centrality of class in determining the Palestinian struggle and the dynamics of it. My question is, what does that mean? What is a class? How are classes organized? Like, how do we actually reach a class as a class? Yeah, what does it look like? Because, yeah, it was kind of ambiguous, I think, and I want to avoid the possibility of class being a thing that we just say we're organizing. What are the practical realities of reaching a class?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to be very brief. Ron, I just wanted to echo something with you. I'm Chilean. My family exiled from Chile here to Canada after the coup. And as a Chilean Canadian, it feels a bit of an empty vase for me to be participating in these rallies when there's not enough of my own Chilean compatriots. This is just very quickly for a lot of people that may not know this, but Chile is one of the places that has housed a huge portion of the Palestinians that left during the first NABCA and continuous. They're up to about over 600,000 Palestinians living in Chile. And I echo with you, you know, as Chileans, we really should be there more the way they are in the front lines in Chile right now, both Chileans and the Palestinian community. They're rallying, getting arrested, getting hosed down with water and stuff. So I just wanted to echo with you that I hear you. I feel like I miss my own people, and maybe think of, I have, very quickly, what would you suggest for me to go back to my community and try to encourage more Chilean and Latin American participation? And the second question I have very quickly, this is for Fadi. The question is regarding holding Netanyahu accountable. As you know, there's already a lot of pressure all around the world, even by Abbas, the government, to take Netanyahu to the International Criminal Court under the Genocide Convention for war crimes. So what does this framework look like here locally? How can we branch that internationally and actually make that concrete pressure to take Netanyahu to court and charge him for war crimes? Thank you. My name is Kai. I'm independent.
Thank you so much for those first three questions. Looking at the time, it's 9:15 and we do want to be wrapped up, I think ideally by 9:30. So I'm gonna cap the questions there for now. Then we'll give panelists a chance to respond. We'll ask the question from our online audience, and I think that might be it. So passing it back to our panelists, one question on mass action. Is it needed, and how do we make it happen? How do we outreach to communities that are not already active in the struggle? Question on class, what is it? And how do we reach the working class? And then advice for how to reach Chilean and other communities, as well as the question of the criminal court. So who wants to start here?
Okay, starting with the Chilean question. So I faced a similar problem since I'm Lebanese, and unfortunately there isn't a very big Lebanese community here. But it did not stop me to be very vocal. So what I would encourage you to do to bring up the Chilean people here is to be more vocal at rallies. The more you become vocal, the more people from Chile will be aware of what you do. The more you're gonna connect with the community, the more you're gonna have strength in numbers. And this is what we need at the moment. I encourage everyone to speak at a rally, at least speak once or twice and bring something special to the table, all right? This is how you bring emphasis to your own communities. And going to the second questions, I believe if you as a community, as a Chilean community here in Winnipeg, you have strength in numbers, what you could do is you could ask your own government, start sending emails, call your embassies. Such actions, they will indeed force change in Chile and other countries all around the world. I would also say start a community, like the Filipino community here. They started a Filipino for Palestine, is that right? Yeah. So I encourage everyone who has like a different nationality to do the same thing. This is how you reach your countries at home. By pressing your governments, by sending emails, by being vocal on the internet, that's how you attract the attention. And this is how it has been working for me. And it has been working really well. So I think that's the best way I could have summed it up. If any of the panelists have any other answer for this question, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, so I'll start first with the mass action one. I think we need to think more long-term, to put an emphasis on seeing numbers within Winnipeg. Well, numbers are always useful within actions, and they can very much push our governments and different colonial bodies to do things, or to feel like they should do things. I think we need to actually question, why are we lacking numbers right now? I think we need to look at for at least my example, like for Indigenous communities here, like what are the seeds of Zionism that are taking place within my community? They're keeping us hesitant from showing up right now. What are the different systems and structures at play, like those international trips, like the different Zionist leaders meeting with Indigenous leaders over the past couple decades, right? Like what are the different things we need to deconstruct within our community right now to even make it possible for people to show up? And especially with my community, there being such like a mass class divide too. Like folks that usually show up to these things are not the folks that are struggling within the streets, or not the folks that are like the most low income. Those folks are still fighting for their lives right now too in their own way. So I think we also need to think about like how can we even internally like look at class within racialized communities to ensure that we are providing all the access and resources resources and education they need to even be able to show up with themselves at all. So I think mass action, while great, we're fighting for the liberation of Palestine, for the healing of Palestine, for justice for Palestine, right? Not just a ceasefire right now. And while numbers are amazing, numbers are great, we need to think about how can we get to liberation, and what is stopping us from showing up right now. So I don't think we need to focus necessarily on numbers in this moment. I think we also had a lot of great examples on like what are the direct action methods we have above ground and underground. Always down for the underground stuff. And then to the Chilean piece, it's hard for me to speak to that. Like I feel the disheartedness of seeing my community not showing up at times, and I want to echo and thank you for like speaking up on that. I think I even looked to myself because it took me like I was not present at the start either, and I think like just the fact that I saw some of my kin in other communities throw themselves into the fire and immediately start organizing, immediately start speaking is what was like I need to show up, I need to actually do it. So. It can be a slow burn, and I don't have an answer for a diaspora community in particular. I think I have a very specific experience here, but I think you got a pretty good answer at the start, actually. So that's it.
Yeah, I wanted to speak really quickly to the question about class, because that was a really excellent question, and we should all be able to answer that. So when we think about what is class and what are our class interests, or you as an individual, what is your class position within our capitalist colonial nation and system? What always helps me is thinking about what is your relationship to labor and what is your relationship to capitalism? So in terms of labor, do you own your labor or do you have to sell it in order to survive? And if you do other people, does your boss or some CEO who runs the company that you work for, are they making a profit off of you selling your labor to survive? That tells you a lot about your class position. You are part of the working class if you have to sell your labor. And that tells you a lot about your relationship to capitalism. You are oppressed by capitalism. You are oppressed by the capitalist class. And lots of people occupy that position in many different ways. Lots of racialized people, indigenous peoples. Of course, there are members of the capitalist class who are racialized people, and they have a very different relationship to capitalism and a very different class interests from you. So it's not just about identity. It's not just about who else in my situation, who else is Jewish or who else is Romani, because again, Zionist Jews and I don't share the same class interests. So yeah, I think that really helps clarify some things when we focus on our relationship to labor and our relationship to capitalism within the system, and then building on those shared class interests. For the Chile question, I thought that was a wonderful question. That really spoke to me, and I think a lot of us. The one thing I wanted to bring up is, again, about shared class interests. I think talking to other Chileans about the shared interests of Palestine and Chile, especially when it comes to the history of colonialism and imperialism faced by the West. I'm thinking specifically of the US-funded and Western imperialist-funded coup of Allende, the installation of the Pinochet dictatorship. that is in many ways a very similar, that was a very similar colonial and imperialist project as to what's happening now with Israel's installation within Palestinian occupied territories. And it tells us a lot about sort of the shared interests between different nations in the global south and their stake in fighting imperialism and colonialism from the West and these, US-funded, Canadian-funded, British-funded coups and dictatorships in order to serve imperialist interests, overthrowing democratically elected governments in order to install people like Pinochet to serve Western imperialist interests. Very similar. So I don't know if that helps, but that's something that I look at when having conversations like that.
Thank you so much. I want to invite Brendan up to ask a question from our online audience, and I'll make sure that Liz gets first dibs on that question.
So we have 3 questions now from online, actually.
Oh, okay.
So the first is, in response to Misha's speech, what was the decision-making process like at Boeing where you all decided to escalate to a hard picket? And I think that if any other panelists have thoughts on how to dynamically make decisions in those kinds of action spaces, those thoughts would be most welcome. Second question is, what are good ways to support Palestinian companies locally here in Winnipeg? Where are local shops selling products like food, et cetera, to help Palestinian products? And the final question is, can panelists provide advice to students who plan to go into education to fight and educate and show solidarity, but feel burnt out with educational institutions that don't change? How do we fight and stay motivated and not lost?
Can I just, because there's one question I realize about Netanyahu, and I don't want to forget the elephant, but I don't want to fixate on the elephant. So Netanyahu is only one person, and so while we love the international community to gather and persecute this one person, it's just one person. Yeah. What's happening after Biden, Trump, those Trudeau? Are we going to have the illegal settlements off the ground? Are we going to have the wall dismantled? Are we going to have refugees coming back to their land? So all these issues, because they can take them away. Hannah Arendt, Eichmann's trial, Hannah wanted the death penalty on Eichmann. That's not going to get us back the 6 million that were lost. What else are we going to do for the Jews to feel safe throughout Europe besides the one Eichmann? So that's just one example. In terms of class is wealth, class is income, labor, but also land for Indigenous people. We leave them out of the class relations. We don't need them. We replace them. We kick them off. That's what's happening in Gaza. And part of the challenges here is that we don't have too many Indigenous people in the room. We're also not too many sensitive to our class politics. And so often in the university, when an anti-Zionist poster deserves calling the cops on, but not a student getting attacked on campus, it tells you that there's a class interest that justifies what requires a police response. And so when we think of class stuff, we can't just think about violence and movement. We have to think about those labor relations and why newcomers come on stolen land to live as settlers, as bourgeoisie. And that's why we also have problems in this stuff. So yeah, there's lots of questions been asked. Education. Education is, we need more people in education, but we also need more people outside of education. And so, yeah, fighting the education, but also outside of it. The challenge now is that every time you're going to say something in an educational setting, you're going to get labeled as an anti-Semite if you're criticizing Israel because of the IHRA definition. So you could have some policies in place, you can have some training, but if we don't have still, back to the basics, Indigenous people in teaching roles, racialized people in teaching positions, across the board, like we don't have those places. If we have more pockets of Indigenous people in our movements, we wouldn't do much of this talking. Land is dignity, land is life. You don't have to agree with me and what I wear and what I look like, but you should agree that maybe I should live on a place that was my land. So, you know, but anyways, too much has been said, and I appreciate you all.
Yeah, thanks. I talked about the idea of mainstreaming support for Palestine, mainstreaming the narrative, and so I want to just clarify that when I say mainstreaming, we're all part of the mainstream in different ways, and I'm concerned, and I know this is just the reality of how our struggles for rights work, but I'm so concerned when I hear people, feeling limited or feeling insufficient or inadequate in the fact that their communities are not stepping up as much as they want them to. And so I just would encourage all of us to support each other. I made a list of some of the things that sometimes, in our ways of working in change, especially in North America, we can be hard on ourselves. One of the things that I want to support us to do better is to recognize that an injury to one is an injury to all, but also to support people when they're under attack. We haven't done a great job of that. I think that the individualism sets in, and so I'm always learning from movements that are represented here, Indigenous movements in particular on Turtle Island, that don't have that same individualistic sentiment. We all internalize some of it because this is where we are, but it's really important that we see through that and really step up to support when people are in trouble. So folks like Arij at the University of Manitoba, the nursing student, I was so pleased to hear that 8,000 calls and messages went into the University of Manitoba about her suspension and the very vicious disciplinary letter that they sent her, which sought to ruin her career for doing nothing wrong, and in fact for stepping up as a person of conscience and principle. And so that idea, that's one thing we can borrow from labor, that an injury to one is an injury to all. And I think that the issue of burnout, it's really important that we experience and feel. We can't become desensitized, but it's also really important that we support each other and that we don't operate on guilt, because guilt won't get us very far. And it will slow down our movements because things get complicated when we start to operate through guilt. I also wanted to mention that Labor for Palestine has a listing of boycott options, Palestinian businesses and places to get Palestinian products. We'll share that with the organizers so that you can have a look at that list. It's just for the local community in Winnipeg, but it's a start for that question about how we can support Palestinian, purchase Palestinian products and support Palestinians in Winnipeg who are doing that work. I think lastly, I want to mention, other folks have been way more articulate than I will ever be on things like class, but I wanted to take up the issue of class because it was on my list of things that we need to challenge ourselves to do differently. And we are really hung up on stability, and that's part of what makes it so hard to mobilize in Canada, because if you look at surveys of class issue, we don't really talk about class in Canada that much. This is not a place where there's a broad discussion of class. People are mostly class negative and see it as a negative topic. And so the awareness, people's own awareness of class is something that requires a lot of discussion. We're hung up on stability, and everyone identifies as middle class, from the working poor to the quite wealthy to even millionaires. And so that is something that is important for us to be conscious of going into any organizing situations, that we recognize that, because we are trying to do a lot of things in talking about Palestine, and as was said earlier, it is one of those keystone issues that a lot of other issues are revolving around, so we always have to proceed with caution. We also have these anti-intellectual left traditions. I think we've blown that out of the water today, some really awesome intellectuals talking about the issues. But yeah, I just wanted to flag those things, and I think that will help us to work through and avoid burnout, to get at the class interests, and to support Palestinians here in Winnipeg.
It's getting late, so I'm going to ask Misha to respond to the question about Boeing, and then we'll come to a close.
Okay, I'll keep it fairly quick. I mean, so the question was how we made that decision. We literally rallied before going to the Boeing factory, about a block away with our signs, and kind of did some chants to get our kind of group together, and then we had someone kind of go over what the strategy was for the day, and then that person just brought up the option of whether we wanted it to be a soft picket or a hard picket, and in that moment there was just a vote that happened. We decided collectively. And with actions like this, there's a certain amount of planning you can do beforehand, and to make sure that we have all the different moving parts, and we have all the different supplies, and people have different roles that they're playing on the day. But on the day itself and during the action, everything kind of plays out there in often very unexpected ways. It depends who shows up, what different unexpected factors are there, and there's a lot of really active, in the moment, democratic decision making that's very live and sometimes unwieldy, and very fluid that happens when you're doing an action like this. So I'll just say it's not planned out entirely beforehand and then just carried out. You do the planning, which allows you then to make very live decisions during the action as a group, and that's how we made that decision.
Okay, thank you again so much. I feel so much regret having to cut this conversation short. I hope it will be, even though it's been long, I hope it is the first of many that we can have together as part of this movement, which people have insisted is an ongoing movement that needs to be durable and long-lasting. So we're going to close with a song, but first I'll mention, in response to the question about Palestinian businesses, please do look at the resources distributed by Labor for Palestine. I specifically, though, want to shout out Yafa Cafe and Rana Abdullah. I think all of us have seen Rana's face and heard her words and know that she's the heart of the movement here in Winnipeg in many ways. So before we invite Ronald to sing for us, I want to say thank you again to the panelists. And big thank you to the sponsors of tonight's event, so Queers for Palestine Winnipeg, Midnight Sun Magazine, the Association of United Ukrainian Canadians for this beautiful space. And a big special thank you to our comrades at Strike Poster Design Collective. Big thank you. I'll also say that all of us, I think, already know this weekend, Saturday, December 16th, 1 p.m. at the Manitoba Legislative Building, we'll be at All Out for Palestine, the rally and the march that happens every weekend, that has been happening every weekend for the past 10 weeks. Thank you to Canadian Palestinian Association of Manitoba for organizing these demonstrations. You're the life of the movement in Winnipeg. And as we're wrapping up, again, I'll mention there's a fundraiser table right over there, t-shirts, prints, patches, and at the door we are collecting donations to cover the cost of the venue and the equipment that we rented. And I believe that Hussein has an announcement as well.
Okay, so as many of you may not have known, But currently I'm working with some producers on a project called Story of Liberation. It is a play that's gonna be done May or April of next year. It's gonna be showing the timeline of the Palestinian struggle. We're not gonna only show that the hardship of the Palestinians, but also the joy of the Palestinian people. We're now asking for sponsors. We're gonna need some actors, and more importantly, a stage manager. So whoever is interested, you can contact me on my personal Instagram. You could ask anyone about it, everyone knows it. And what the hell is it? Thank you very much, Talasht. Yes, anyways, it's gonna be a very big project. We're planning a lot for it. We have finished filming a sketch, an introduction for it. It's gonna be posted any day now, and hoping to see you guys there. Thank you very much, Winnipeg. Thank you very much to everyone in the crowd. Round of applause to everyone. Now back to Isabel.
I was always taught to speak out intentions and purpose of song whenever I offer it. As I mentioned, I was seeing a lack of us offering our gifts within my community. So as like a literal way to offer it into space, thought I'd sing. The song is going to be the prayer song. It is a song that was done by Neil Hall, who sadly passed away not a while ago. He was a knowledge keeper. My friend, my good mentor, Vern Dano, is one that's been bugging me to remember this story and to hold on to the story. And it's a song that I offer during times of either transition, during times of celebration, or times of grief. So the song today I'm offering as a prayer for those that are doing this good work within all these different territories, but also a prayer for those within Palestine that need our love and support. So you're welcome to stand, you're welcome to sit. I don't hold you any other way. The standing thing's like a weird colonial tradition, if I'm being honest. I'm going to stand because it helps me sing. So it's all your choice. But yeah, feel free to move around if you got to run, because we're way over time.